Business Secretary Kenneth Clarke is still with us in Nottingham. Where would they come from if you were in power, Ken Clarke?
Well, once you solve the immediate deficit and debt problem, which is going to dominate our lives for the next year or two, but alongside it, you've got to start building that balanced economy that everybody talks about. It should have been done for the last 10, 12 years. I mean, making speeches about the manufacturing base in the House of Commons in the early days of New Labour was a waste of time. Manufacturing has fallen steadily as a proportion of GDP throughout their time. But what you need now is, along the lines of James Dyson's reports, what you require.
Fine, OK, and you start cutting public spending as you're threatening to do if you get office, unemployment's going to go up, isn't it?
Now, the idea that you have to keep on with all the advertising agency programs, the consultancies, all the identifiable waste as an important way of keeping the economy going is, frankly, I think, rather foolish. I realise it's Gordon Brown, not you. I'm not being rude to you.
At the no, you be as rude as you like. But at the very least, you will put a lot of advertising people and consultants out of work.
But let's look at the positive. I just think the idea that you can't start cutting waste out of government at the moment is a sideshow. Taking the positive, James Dyson pointed out that because people need education and skills and manufacturing needs them, you've got to look at how we teach science, technology, maths in the schools, produce more scientists and engineers from the universities, actually give some incentives to business angels, venture capitalists who will get the innovations coming out of our laboratories and our engineering faculties into business development in this country. And for businesses across the country, I could give you a whole speech I give to Chambers of Commerce about making credit going to business, actually scrapping a lot of the money wasted on train to gain, as the government call it, and actually giving help to small businesses to take on apprentices. We need a pro-business policy, which we should have had for the last 13 years.
All right.
But they just assumed that a silly boom in the city was sufficient to give them a modern, prosperous economy, and we've seen what's happened.
Can we look at the scenario you described today, in which there was a hung parliament, and you said there would then be panic in the markets, and the IMF would then have to step in? Just how would it happen?
Well, Hamish McRae in The Independent, I found, I hadn't read him when I said this in answer to my question. I read his piece this evening. He's a very respected financial commentator. Turns out to be saying the same thing. The key thing is whether after the election the markets, the world, looks at the result and says there is a government with the political will and the competence and the political authority to deliver what is required to get the finances under control. Now, at the moment, the deficit is as bad as Greece. The deficit is far worse than it was when Healey was in. And the Liberals who've emerged, their principal programme is a £17 billion tax cut, which they don't explain how they're going to pay for it. The Scottish nationalist, who might feature, made it cheerily clear, Alex Salmond, he'll support anybody who makes spending cuts in Scotland less than the spending cuts in England, what he calls giving the Scottish a voice. Now, I think the reaction to that could be very dangerous. If the outside world decides we can't manage our debt, then you go to the IMF, which we haven't done for over 30 years. And I've said it before, it's a statement of fact.
The same would be true, would it not, were the Conservatives the largest party, but not with an overall majority?
Oh yes, I mean this is the lack of an overall majority. Now, so if the Conservatives couldn't demonstrate a working majority, there'd be doubts. It'd still be necessary to produce that 50-day budget, and the crucial thing is people would look to see whether Parliament was ready to back up a government going to control the deficit and the debt.
So it could be George Osborne toddling off to the IMF then, could it?
No. We'll only toddle off to the IMF if we are not able to form a strong government. It's a Conservative government with a working majority, I think, is the answer. That's why I've come back into frontline politics. That's why I'm arguing this, because I think, it isn't just a celebrity TV talent contest. People have to realise this is the worst economic crisis since the war. So they're being asked a serious question, and they've got to give a serious answer. Do you want the Conservatives or the Labour government to be in charge? Liberals have no view on that. Okay. Will you produce a new government that has a proper majority to do the job and get us out of the mess? Okay. If not, the IMF will do it. We won't get a let-off, I can assure you.
Ken Clarke, thank you. Well, all the main parties agree that the story of the last 7 days has, as we've been saying, been the surging support for the Liberal Democrats. It's attributed to disenchantment